The sound of rain tapped lightly against the windows of École de Musique La Rochefoucauld, threading itself through the nervous energy in the studio. I'd come early, violin case clasped under my arm, hoping that by running scales in the little side room I might steady my hands. But nothing quieted the familiar heat surging in my chest, not technique drills, not the comfortable heft of my bow, not the wordless hush before a critique. The other students clustered in the corner, muttering in low voices. My piece, a Ravel sonata, had felt strong in rehearsal, but now every mistake replayed in my mind as though the violin itself twisted my memories. When the door creaked open and Madame Fournier strode in, heels echoing on the wooden floor, the energy in the room tamped down. She was neither cruel nor affectionate, praise from her felt as rare as a gold coin, and I had received precious little. My parents said her tutelage was a privilege. It was, but it cost me sleep and confidence. "All right, Lies," she said, voice brisk, "let us hear the Ravel." I rose, every muscle fighting to keep my composure, and propped the violin on my shoulder. The first note shimmered, but my fingers trembled on the shift, distorting the phrase. I scanned the faces, some focused, others politely bored, a few stifling smiles. Halfway through the second movement, I fumbled a passage I'd mastered yesterday. The sound was jagged, humiliating. By the final chord, sweat beaded at my neck. No applause, not even the polite tapping Professor Lebrun sometimes offered his pupils. Silence. Madame Fournier's expression soured as she perched on the piano bench, her glance trailing to the assembled students whose laughter was now a breath away from breaking out. "You play as if you are apologizing to the music itself. Ravel is not for the timid," she said, her tone clipped. "Did you practice with intention or did you daydream as usual?" I felt my cheeks flame. "I practice 3 hours each day, madame." She turned to the class. "There are people who say they wish to be soloists," her eyes flickered to me, "but life, fortunately, weeds them out. Lies, have you considered something practical? Accompanist, perhaps, or teaching? Paris is not a cradle for childish dreams." The other students' murmurs turned sharp, a current of snickers riding the air. Onyx, from the conservatory's composition track, whispered not softly enough, "La Rêveuse." "She wants to play at Salle Pleyel, I heard." "Someone else with that, maybe in a subway if she's lucky." Madame Fournier didn't rebuke them. She just waved her dismissive hand and shifted focus to the next performer. My pulse thundered in my ears as I shrank back to my chair, fighting tears. The rest of the critique passed by, a blur of faces and music. That afternoon I walked home. Rain collected in my shoes, soaking my socks, turning each step into an act of endurance. My parents would be waiting, expecting a report, and already I felt the shape of their disappointment tightening around me. Dinner was tuna salad and silence. My father chewed thoughtfully, then asked, not unkindly, "How was your lesson?" I looked at my plate, it was fines. My mother's mouth quirked, skeptical. "We've heard this teacher is very strict. You mustn't let it discourage you." I nodded, staring at the flecks of carrot in the salad. I wanted so badly for them to believe I was on the right path. More than that, I needed them to remember the girl who stood beside the river as a child, dreaming about stages and spotlights. Imagining the music within her hands was enough. Yet every word since the studio told me my dream was a private joke shared by others. After dinner, my father began, "We've always wanted you to be happy, but music isn't a career for most, you know that." I said nothing. My younger brother Mark piped up, "Maybe you can play in the back of a cafe like those old men." He meant no harm, but resentment coiled in my chest. It's strange how, after a wound, everyday life acquires a different taste. I went to classes, played at home, but everything felt muted, as if a thin glass wall had slid between me and the world. The music that once felt electric now sounded remote, like it belonged to someone else. The next years ground by under the weight of skepticism. Madame Fournier's remarks grew colder, her critiques more precise. My classmates' jokes about La Rêveuse sharpened at parties, in hallways, on the Palais Royal steps. Even the teachers who were kind did so with pity. The only place I felt myself was the Pont des Arts in late twilight, violin case pressed to my chest, watching the Seine slip quietly beneath the old stone arches. I listened to the lap of water, the distant echo of an accordion, and dared to imagine a life where I wasn't an object of ridicule. But here's the truth: ridicule can be a strange fuel. In isolation, I found a bitter clarity, the kind that strips away vanity and makes you either quit or double down. I began to practice not for praise but for solace. I played until my fingers bled, chasing the music not for approval but because it was the only way I knew how to exist. I took smaller jobs, weddings, occasional gigs with an amateur quartet in Montmartre, lessons with children from the neighborhood. Every euro was a small stone laid on an uncertain path. My parents, by then weary of the struggle, suggested I look for work as a receptionist at a friend's travel agency. I smiled, nodded, said I was considering it. I wasn't. What changed everything came quietly, as most real opportunities do, a posting on a battered notice board at the back of a metro station. June Orchestra Church Premier Violon Tournée Europe possible. Auditions see same day. Young Orchestra seeks first violin, European tour possible, tryouts Saturday. I arrived at the basement hall in Seine Town with nothing to lose. The audition panel was 3 scruffy musicians and a woman in her 40s with a lined face and a direct gaze. I played Bach, then Bartok, then Schubert. When I finished, the woman looked at her colleagues and said, "We're finished here. She's our first." Her name was Sophia Bernard and she was the conductor. The orchestra was new, ragtag, but raw with talent and hunger, people who'd been overlooked, people like me. We rehearsed in borrowed rooms, ate cheap takeaway on the curb, and played our first show in a half-empty church in Rouen, but something gelled. Under Sophia's baton, we played as though every phrase mattered. Our final chord hovered in the air, the audience's silence amplifying everything we'd put in. Then the applause came, a cascade that washed over me. The touring began small, Belgium, northern Italy, small towns in Germany. The orchestra found its voice. 10 critics in Dresden called us a revelation. A Dutch cellist of repute invited me to play a duo on Dutch radio, and afterward told Sophia, "Your lies plays like a woman on the edge of the world." This is what people remember. It felt both unreal and inevitable. The mockery of those years faded, replaced by something new and frightening, possibility. Letters began to arrive, a Paris booker, a music school in Lyon, invitations for auditions with established orchestras. I relished the work but never forgot the sting of the old rejections. There's a kind of freedom in being underestimated. Success mattered because I'd been discounted so thoroughly. My parents called more during this period. My mother would pass the phone to my father, who shifted between pride and disbelief. "We saw your picture in the Figaro," he'd say, voice thick with something like awe. "Is that really our lies?" My brother joked that I was the family's claim to fame, but I could hear in his voice the pride he never showed as a boy. Years passed in a blur, clapboard stages in Polish towns, golden-lit halls in Milan, the orchestra growing in reputation until word came. We'd been asked to appear at the Philharmonie de Paris, the same city I once fled, offering me its grandest stage. I remember sitting in the wings that night, polishing my bow, the gleam of the house lights seeping through the velvet curtain. Sophia squeezed my shoulder as the stage manager called our cue. "Whatever you do, Lies, play it for yourself." The concert was a triumph. The hall, hushed and expectant, vanished when I played the opening lines of the Saint-Saëns concerto. Every lesson, every mocking laugh, every sleepless night, none of it followed me under the lights. The music surged and carried me, pure and clear, into a realm where only the sound mattered. Afterward, critics lauded not just the music but my interpretation. They called me unapologetic, arresting, honest. My phone buzzed with messages, some from the very people who once doubted my place in music. And so, when Sophia called a month later and said, "We're coming back to La Rochefoucauld for the next series, your old conservatory, you'll lead the chamber concert," my breath caught. A strange mix of dread and resolve flickered in my veins. The old studio hadn't much changed. The same rain-streaked windows, the same glossy grand piano, the scent of beeswax polish and dust. News had travelled ahead of me. The programme bore my name in bold beneath the title, "Violons du futur, Lise Morel en soliste." Before the performance, I peered through the half-open door. My family had arrived. My father in his Sunday suit, hair newly trimmed, my mother seated stiffly beside him, hands tight on her purse. Mark was there too, taller now, leaning back against the wall with his friends. Further down, I caught glimpses of former classmates. Onyx, now teaching at the school, held a coffee cup and whispered with 2 other instructors. Even Madame Fournier, elegant as ever, had come, sitting apart and scanning her program with thinly veiled impatience. As showtime neared, I warmed up backstage, nerves thrumming in my palms. Would I always feel the weight of those early years? Or could I finally play for myself, for everyone who ever questioned if I belonged? Spotlights traced lazy circles along the burgundy curtain as the audience settled. Sophia's introduction was brief, then she nodded my cue. I walked out, violin in hand, to a silence thick with expectation. I saw them all, parents, brother, old teachers, former doubters, arrayed like a jury. My heart pounded so loudly I feared they could hear it. I tuned, then lifted my bow. There's a peculiar power in facing the people who doubted you. Their presence sharpens every note, every choice. I played the opening, a slow, luminous melody from a newly commissioned French piece, my sound ringing pure and unwavering. The music spoke for me more than arguments, more than apologies. Each phrase was a counterpoint to the old taunts. I glimpsed my mother's hand at her mouth. My father blinked, hands knotting and unknotting in his lap. Madame Fournier sat motionless, her gaze fixed and piercing. I found onyx in the corner. Gone was the smirk, replaced by something like caution. The crowd leaned forward as if the music itself was rewriting some earlier story. The cadenza arrived, fast and wild. Every shift and double stop landed clean, my bow tracing quicksilver arcs across the strings. Tension left my limbs. I felt for the first time in years not that I might fail but that there was nothing left to prove. When the final note hung in the air, the silence was alive, a held breath, a collective reckoning. Then applause broke, loud and sustained, echoing in that old room where I'd last been shamed. I bowed once, meeting every gaze. My father rose first, clapping, face shining. My mother hugged herself, tears staining her cheeks. Mark whooped, waving at me, and his friends joined. Onyx clapped slowly, a little shell-shocked. Even Madame Fournier, whose opinions had once wounded most, didn't rise but nodded, a single grave gesture, as if at last acknowledging what had always been there. Afterward, the reception was a daze. People I hadn't seen in years pressed close, offering shy congratulations, recalling when we'd shared lockers or performed in student quartets. Some were sheepish, others effusive. Madame Fournier found me briefly, drawing me aside near the piano. "Lies," she said quietly, "I was hard on you, perhaps needlessly. You have found your way. There was regret there, but also respect. You are more than a Ravel. You are an artist." My mother embraced me so fiercely I thought she would shatter, whispering, "We were wrong to doubt, so wrong." My father murmured, "I am proud of you, Lies. Truly proud." Mark, ever the jokester, handed me a subway ticket, just in case you missed the glamour of the metro. We laughed, and it was the first laughter that didn't slightly wound. The night ended with me alone on the Pont des Arts, violin case by my side, Paris glittering against the river. I listened to the ripple of distant voices, felt the old ghosts recede, replaced by the quiet certainty that follows survival. I thought of all those who'd sneered, who tried to bury the light. I thought of the aching years of rain in my shoes and hope clenched tight as a fist. I closed my eyes, felt the night wind on my skin, and promised myself to keep playing, not for revenge nor for acceptance, but for the music that carried me back home. True success, I now understood, is not marked by applause or the awe of those you've proved wrong. It lives in the silent moments afterwards when you finally belong to yourself. Paris shimmered before me. The next song waited, and for the first time I didn't look back.